So it's 9 o'clock. We'll get started here, everyone. Welcome to this private equity webinar entitled The Extra 15%, How Transformative Talent Fuels Success. And with me today is John Damgaard, former CEO of Matrix Care and current executive chairman of Velocity EHS, both private equity funded. We had the opportunity and pleasure to work with John with OMERS, which was the sponsor for Matrix Care. We've actually placed John working with one of the partners there, Mark Van der Wart and Lisa Melchior, who has her own fund now. Did a little team build out for him, put an independent director in place over time. So, John and I have got to know each other, I think, quite well over the years and always stayed in touch. A lot of changes in the business based on John's view of what needed to happen when he came in, certainly on the business front, but in the context of this webinar, talent and culture figured prominently, thus the title of the webinar relative to transformation. Ultimately, the company sold to ResMed quite successfully for $750 million. So that's how I got to know John. And John, why don't you tell us a little bit about the situation when you stepped in, and we'll get into some more meaty context, more meaty topics around culture and talent as well.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the intro, Keith. Yeah, I mean, we were finishing up the take private of Mediware, now WellSky, with Thoma Bravo, and I was honestly planning to retire for a while, but got a call about this opportunity in Minneapolis area, and it was long-term care EMR. I didn't know that much about it. Had seen my parents kind of stumble through that environment, but decided what the heck, took it on. It was actually a U.S. sub of a Canadian company called Logibek. Some of you folks might be familiar with that. It bounced around a bit. I think GI Partners had it for a while after OMERS, but we spun it out. It was a roll-up of a series of 5 or 6 platforms that have been purchased, mostly in skilled nursing. So I hit the ground and pretty quickly came up with a thesis that, we had to do something broader than skilled nursing across the landscape of long-term care. But most importantly, and the topic today is kind of figure out what you have to work with from a people perspective. And what I found was, obviously it was a roll-up and there was very little integration, just financial statements, frankly. So culturally, procedurally, and from a talent management perspective, kind of a bunch of islands, very political, warring factions kind of thing. People in the wrong seats, a lot of people who are kind of focused on preserving their income versus building any value in the business. So, I had to kind of sort through all of that and figure that out. And then, as I think is always typical, you got to find the big red noses and the floppy shoes and get the clowns, out of the equation pretty quickly. And, I love PE ownership cycles. I think they bring a certain tenacity and anxiety in terms of speed. So, there's not really time for a lot of question marks, right? You need athletes. Oh, there we go. You need athletes who've kind of been there, done that, because things have to move relatively quickly. So, decided that there were some things that need to change and did that early on. But then I think also, as a business begins to scale and sort of work through its transformation plan, some folks who are, good contributors, they just run out of, they're AA players and you need major league players. And, having those kinds of honest conversations with folks along the way, if you don't do those things, then you eventually are surrounded by Peter principles and the business begins to stall out. So that was kind of early days at Matrix Care. There was, people who just weren't going to cut it. We had a head of finance who was focused on strategic initiatives like cheaper coffee in the break room and, horrible stuff like that, that really didn't do anything for the business, just made miserable employees more miserable. So I had to swap that person out and bring in a gentleman named James Evans, who went on to do wonderful things at eSolutions and Francisco Partners and all kinds of good stuff. So early on, sort of parachute in, figure out what you got, figure out a basic thesis, and then get to work immediately on the team. Because if you don't do that, then nothing else is going to matter
Yeah,
after that. So, and that's where we asked for your help, some of those steps along the way.
that's right. That's right. And yeah, so maybe yeah, I know that in parallel with sort of just getting the right people in the right seats on the bus, contemplating the overall value proposition to the market, ensuring that the next generation Cadillac product was really purpose built the right way to take to market, on a platform that had acquired several different versions of what that could be and need to be consolidated. Did you do anything specifically on the commercial or R&D side to facilitate kind of next steps?
Yeah, those were probably the two key things. I mean, as they always are, right? I mean, the essence of value is innovation. So you've got to have the product and the platform. And you said it right. I mean, we were taking a series of separate siloed, assets with separate tech stacks and all that, and basically creating a longitudinal environment where a human could move or a person could move between care settings and you would have context. So we needed big league CTO talent. So we went out and sourced a gentleman, who'd been there, done that in a variety of healthcare IT environments. We could not have executed on the strategy without, the clean sort of horizontal tech to go with it. So that hire was critical early on. And then, the other thing it always is, right, to go to market, you got to have the product and you got to, have the professional big league, revenue officer types. So I went out and brought in a gentleman I'd worked with before. The previous person was kind of someone who had, you see it all the time, right? You got to check which business card they have with them, right? They've worked for every company in the space, and I call them retreads, right? And they stick around just long enough to find another job, but never actually accomplish anything, and blah blah blah. So needed a professional to come in, structure the hunting, farming motions, and the professional comp, quota coverage, and all the aspects of real direct sales efforts, and of course back that up with demand gen and different things. But those two forays, the CTO and the revenue officer, ultimately were what allowed us to sort of summit the thing in a relatively quick period of time.
Yeah, thank you. So now you've got basically the right people in the right seats on the bus. Let's come back to the title here, the extra 15%. Tell us what that means from your perspective, and how you stimulate that kind of thinking inside the organization.
Yeah, I think the best way to say it is, you can get a good result and a good exit multiple just by sort of being very, methodical and making smart business decisions. But if you really want to ring the bell off the wall, you have to have a battle cry or an anchor point for the employee base, right? So the mission matters, and that's where you get the extra 15%. You're looking for that 1 hour a day. You want that, they're going to stay a little longer. They're going to do a little work off hours. They're going to, make sure that something is successful when they really otherwise wouldn't care. And you do that by sort of, badging the environment with a mission that matters. And at Matrix Care, we were serving seniors, and, it was about improving their lives. So our mission was to leverage technology to improve the lives of America's seniors. I had an irritating competitor, Point Click Care, which was a Canadian company. What the heck are they doing taking all of our Medicare money? But, I made focus on America's seniors and leveraging technology. And that simple little, and our brand promise was integrated care better outcomes. Because if there's one thing that healthcare still isn't, it's integrated. But you can see the average employee all of a sudden, it's not just a job, right? It's real. And they would latch onto it and give the extra effort. And, we would send them out into the community one day, a quarter or something, and they would go work and volunteer at, different care settings, nursing homes or home health type things to observe and to help. And you could just see that they really cared about this, and they knew that what we were doing could impact outcomes, fewer falls, better, resident satisfaction, whatever the metrics were that we used. But just that simple example of, branding the brand promise, getting the mission about the seniors we were caring for. And that's where you get the extra hour a day, the extra 15%. And I really believe that it's that, back in the day, right? I mean, 15 times EBITDA was a big multiple, back when we sold the business. We got 25. And I really do believe you got to have the strategy, you have the culture, but that mission and that anchor point for the employees to give you that extra effort is critical.
Great. We did a webinar a while back with CEOs that had created what I'll call, cultural transformation and velocity. And a lot of that a little bit already was, how do you do it? Right. I mean, having this mission, there were some questions around how much is the CHRO involved in trying to create the programs and so forth. So when you think about kind of the how beyond maybe the mission, talk to us about sort of one layer down, kind of what you do.
Yeah. Well, listen, my wheelhouse is I like companies in the teenage years, software companies. So say 50 million going to 200, 250 million. I think that's the magic phase. And a lot of times when you get involved, HR is more administrative, right? Making sure the payroll gets done and, there's a sexual harassment policy laying around somewhere or whatever, right? The bare minimum and sort of playing defense, if you will. But these are people businesses. So the human capital strategies, the compensation systems. Are you there, Keith?
I'm here.
I'm freezing up a little bit. The compensation systems, all that stuff matters a lot. And you typically aren't going to have a top flight human capital person, when you get started. So I think the CEO has to lead that and, establish sort of the principles and the groundwork and the themes. And then, make sure you have the right people who can execute on that and ultimately take ownership of it, because you've got plenty of other things on your plate. What you don't do is the mistake I see lots of times, especially in PE-backed environments where, there's a first-time CEO or whatever, and they come in and we're going to be the highest EBITDA producing company in our segment. Oh, wow. That makes me want to come to work. I don't even know what EBITDA means. I don't think it does anything for me, right? So, reward, recognition, making sure you have title structures that make sense. One specific Matrix Care, when I took it over, I think it had 170 employees and like 110 titles. I swear to God, they would just make them up, right? So having ladders, salary bands, using actual data and not playing spin the salary wheel or let's make a deal on every person, right? All the bedrock of basic sort of human workforce management has to be laid down. And then, in my world, I think the job of the CEO ultimately is alignment, right? So making sure people understand what the metrics are. In the absence of metrics, you have politics and emotion. So, let's focus on metrics and, reward people. Things like, just recognition of values, right? People who exhibit your values and do things, you reward them, and it becomes much more of a very deterministic, positive environment versus, just trying to figure out payroll and trying to, negotiate salaries when somebody threatens to leave. It's not a sustainable, scalable way to do it. And, we began to see pretty early on when you take the mission-oriented stuff, the purpose, and then the rewards and the, you know, professional approach to compensation and those things, you'll see, I call them, you know, letting the tigers out of the cage. And sometimes you don't even know who the tigers are early on. And I remember one young lady who was a nurse stepped into a product management role, and typically product managers go through phases of maturity and they start, you know, really being buffeted by the customers who are angry in their lists of whatever, and you blah, I call it the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? You know, these are the 800 grievances I have about your software. Well, she moved past that very, very quickly into, I actually went to school and got her MBA at night while doing it. You know, real value engineering, making sure that what we were working on were the right things, and, you know, engaging the customer base on the value that was being done, not, you know, enhancement number 792, right? Who cares? You know, what are the big things that we really need to do to move the needle? So that young lady, I must admit, I forget her name, but I can visualize, just became a monster. I mean, she just took a very negative situation with some of the customers, and I mean, it became a love fest. And watching her being empowered, um, and enthused about the mission. I mean, there were several examples that I can think of, but that was one that really stuck with me, and made me smile every time I came across her.
Great. That's a great example. And of course, those kind of things have a networking effect internally when they see others that are excited and getting the job done, being rewarded appropriately. Let's drill down a little bit more, but maybe more in the context of you, kind of how you embody the leadership aspects of this. You know, a lot of the common themes we're seeing as we talk about cultural transformation, whether it's, you know, $100 million company or a $10 billion company, is how important it is the leaders and the leader, CEO of the business, is really deeply involved and leading by example with, you know, the right approach and communication to the organization. We talked about several things that are sort of your mantra. I'd love for you to go through those with the folks on the webinar here.
Yeah, I think, you know, call them core values or principles or whatever you want to, but I've really sort of arrived in my career in what I refer to as the 5 matters. I think there's 5 things that matter a lot, right? Expectations matter. That's managing, you know, with investors, customers, employees, personal relationships, whatever. You know, you can actually have a very satisfied customer while doing only a mediocre job. Vice versa, you can be Michael Jordan and have a disappointed customer because the expectations were allowed to be unrealistic and you didn't manage them accordingly. So expectations matter, outcomes matter. Nobody really cares if you got to the 2-yard line. You know, they only remember if you scored. So, you know, horseshoes and hand grenades kind of thing. Outcomes matter. You got to get in the end zone. And that tenacity and that mentality of you got to score, right? 0 points, not good. Field goal, not great, but better than 0 points. We need touchdowns, right? Speed matters. You know, you're trying to engineer an outcome in, honestly, 5 years, 3 to 5 years goes by very quickly. And it matters. I mean, don't put off, do it today, right? Because these things have, you know, time phasing on them. So speed matters a lot. And, you know, competition moves faster, the world moves faster, technology moves faster. So speed matters. You cannot, there are no small, slow animals in nature, right? They get eaten, right? If you're going to be small, you better be quick. And when you get big, you better stay quick or a bigger one's going to eat you, right? So speed matters, respect matters. I think this sort of gets to the leadership thing. You know, when I left Matrix Gear, we sold to Rosamed, and I, you know, retired after the integration. I think we had, I don't know, 1,000 employees or something. And I always would say, you know, we have 1,000 employees ranging from 4'8" to 6'7", I think. Right. And we only discriminate when we pick the basketball team. You know, there's not a lot of, you know, the CFO and the janitor are the same, right? There isn't a hierarchy and an ivory tower and all that kind of stuff. So the respect matters. Everyone deserves respect, and you have to sort of, act accordingly and live it. And then happiness matters. You cannot sustain these things. They're intense. And you ask extraordinary things from people in extraordinarily intense phases. And if you don't love what you're doing and it doesn't truly bring you happiness, then you can't sustain it. You will burn out, or you will just become irrelevant. So making sure that the happiness gets sprinkled in there, the work-life balance, all those things, when you have a company party, it's going to be a humdinger, right? I mean, you really got to have fun and make it lively, and make sure people have, balance and satisfaction in all areas of their life, and really care about them, frankly. But the servant leadership thing, I mean, one of the things I did at Matrix Care was I moved the business headquarters almost immediately to exercise some cultural demons, and got into this new really nice space that had 3 indoor heated parking stalls, which in Minneapolis is a pretty coveted thing, right? So the original sort of quote unquote head of sales, he was out there measuring to make sure his BMW could fit in the damn thing. And, I was like, over my dead body, are you parking in there? I fired him shortly thereafter. But, what an absolute horrible message to send, right? So how about the employee of the month, or the lady on crutches, or the pregnant lady? Wouldn't they be better candidates than you clown, right? You're parking like way out there. Those things matter. And then, when you do have your employee events and things, we're not here to be served. We're here to serve. So get the apron on and get the spatula, or, do your bartending bit. We're not here to be waited on. We're here to take care of folks, and to be sort of shoulder to shoulder with them. And those small little things matter a lot, because if you don't exhibit those things, then they smell a hypocrite pretty quickly, and you're not going to get the extra 15%, right? So they need to see it. They don't always have to like you and the decisions you make, but at least they know you're real and you care. And I always see my mother's face staring at me like, very, I'm not really afraid of anyone on planet Earth. My mother's now gone. That's why, because, I'm very afraid of her. But she burned some of those things into me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I remember after you sold ResMed, we connected. Sold to ResMed, we connected, and your initial response to me was, Keith, well, every once in a while, the blind squirrel finds a nut. So I love your little phrases and ways of conveying important messages, John. And the next topic embodies that: feed the eagles and starve the crows. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So again, I think performance-driven cultures are essential, right, to getting premium outcomes. And it is amazing how many times you find just the opposite of this, right? But when you talk about performance-driven cultures, for example, you've got to lay the bedrock of title structures and salary bands and all that kind of stuff. But in John's world, there are 2 kinds of raises. There are big raises and there are no raises, right? I mean, when you go through the mechanics of merit increases and what have you, right? You have a certain percentage of, average raise, whatever, but this isn't socialism, and this isn't, this isn't a union wage scale. We're not handing out, 3% to everybody. Some people are getting 15%, and a lot of people are getting 0. Because we want those who are the highest performing, who are the lowest in their salary bands, to be disproportionately rewarded. So if you do a job that has a certain value and you do nothing to reach for a higher apple and move up, don't expect a raise, right? Otherwise, the janitor would make $500,000 a year after 4 years, right? Just through the compounding of average raises. Those jobs just aren't worth that from a value perspective. So tilting the compensation machinery so that high performers, relatively low in their salary bands, are always disproportionately rewarded. And those who are at the end and, have done nothing to get promoted or are not interested in doing anything to be promoted, no surprise, you're not going to get a raise, right? So that terrorizes some people, right? They think that's unfair. I think it's perfect, because we want the eagles to fly and reach up, and those who just want to be Klingons and cling on to their job, that's fine. Probably not great with today's inflation, but there's a message there, and the message is we're fostering, performance. And the other thing is, I'm kind of an old school guy, and there are no participation trophies, right? Little Jimmy doesn't get a trophy for 6th place, right? We reward the top people, and in sales, the Red Bull drinking crowd, right? The President's Club and things like that matter, but you got to set the bar high, and when they achieve it, you do really interesting things for them. But the guy who's 97% of plan, there's a reason it's called plan, right? Outcomes matter. And then I think the other thing quickly, Keith, A players, right? A players are great because A players are smart enough to hire A+ players. B players are afraid of A players, so they'll hire C players so that they never get outclassed by the people who report to them. I want nothing but people who are smarter than me and better than me working for me, because then life gets much easier, right? And if you have B players, you should only keep them if they have potential to be A, and you should help them get there. If they're C, you should send them to the competition, C for competition. And I've actually done that. I mean, I've literally gotten them jobs with the competitors, and guess what? They sucked with us and they sucked there. So that's perfect, right? The competition actually thought they were pulling off a coup because they took sales guy X. Sales guy X is a bum. So tune in a year or two from now and he'll be working somewhere else.
So some companies have this approach where they say consciously the bottom 10% needs to go. This sounds more selective, but obviously needs to be institutionalized in the way you think about things, and I'm sure the management team and others. Did you do anything like mandating sort of a certain number needed to go, or was it just more setting the example and culturally making sure those on the team that got it, managed it accordingly?
Yeah, I think, listen, it's the law of large numbers, right? If you're Jack Welch and GE and you've got, 500,000 employees worldwide, statistically, it's probably okay to say 10% need to go. I think McKinsey used to have an up or out type rule or whatever it is, right? In these environments, which tend to be smaller, right? You're hundreds of employees as you're beginning to scale the businesses. I mean, you could make up some rule like that, but I think you risk, something you don't fully understand, and someone who actually is really important, but you don't understand yet why or how, gets swept up in that, and that's going to have a hangover effect on you. So I would not be a huge proponent of just coming in and saying we're going to fire 1 out of 10 every year just because. The idea is let's get 10 good ones always, right? And we shouldn't, it's a continuous process. It's a systemic cultural machinery thing, right? We shouldn't have to come and purge the cupboard, because we should have never put the bad groceries in the cupboard to begin with, right?
Yeah.
I think it's more of a systemic view of it.
Understood. So I don't know if you saw the 60-minute special featuring KKR, and a partner there, I believe his name's Peter Stavros, who is now a huge proponent of holistic kind of equity ownership. And he was referencing a company called CHI Overhead Doors. And it's actually a company we placed the CFO when it was owned by Friedman, Fleischer and Lowe in Arthur, Illinois. And I'm still trying to figure out where Arthur, Illinois is. It's somewhere outside Champaign, Urbana, where you could actually probably put a CFO from Chicago, as opposed to in the middle of Arthur, which frankly, most of the factory is run by the Amish. In any event, once it went through the transaction, they started giving out equity largely down through the organization And of course, people made significant money, you know, 300, 400, $500,000 at a level that they never anticipated upon the exit. How do you feel about that notion of more ownership versus in many cases more concentrated at the top?
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest with you. My views on this have changed over time. I was much more in the camp of this gentleman early on. You know, spread it wide and spread it far, right? And I've actually swung back the other way on this topic, and because of real experiences, you know, it's hard to engineer that in a PE backed, you know, ownership cycle. You can have your incentive, you know, equity pool and all that, but you know, it's when you start spreading it far and wide, right? It's never enough. It's blah blah blah, and that creates all sort of, you know, dynamics and the, you know, dilution and what have you. But forget that. I think the bigger issue for me is, you know, when someone owns 0.0002% of the fully diluted, you know, equity, is it really enough to change their behaviors and to get the extra 15% or more, you know, from them, or to keep a good person from leaving who has a better opportunity? The answer is probably not. The other very stark example or lesson I learned on this was when we under Omers, we were buying one of the first bigger acquisitions, a company called Answers on Demand out of Boca area. You know, we recapped the business, and you know, there was an opportunity for executives to co-invest alongside Omers, and many of us took that opportunity. And I remember I had brought in a chief nursing officer along the way because it's a nursing centric sort of world that we were playing in, and we really didn't have one. So brought in a lady, very credentialed lady, clinically very savvy, financially not so much. And I remember she had incentive equity,